I'm looking at the forum on January 15th, 69 AD, and honestly, it's a mess. Not a senators debating tax code kind of mess. But there's a severed head on a spear, and everyone is cheering kind of mess. That head belonged to Servius Sulpicius Galba the High and Mighty, God King of Rome for all of 7 months. I'm a centurion. I've spent 20 years climbing the ranks, bleeding for the eagle, and breaking my vine staff over the backs of lazy recruits. I was taught that the Sacramentum Militare sacred oath was the glue holding the universe together. But as I watched Galba's own bodyguards melt into the shadows like cowards at a bill signing, I realized the secret of empire everyone whispered about is true. You don't need a senate to make an emperor. You just need a few thousand guys with swords and a very flexible sense of ethics. Welcome to 69 AD, the year where being the leader of the civilized world had the job. Security of a sacrificial goat. Before we get to the part where Rome becomes a literal slaughterhouse, we have to talk about how we got stuck with Galba. Imagine a bald, 73-year-old man so crippled by gout he can't wear shoes, trying to run a military superpower like it's a cheap retirement home. Galba was old school. And by old school, I mean he thought it was 400 BC and we were all fighting for the glory of a republic that died before his great-grandfather was a glint in a legionary's eye. When he took over after Nero's, let's call it a forced retirement, we expected the usual, an accession bonus. A little daunted of him to say, "Thanks for not stabbing me yet," Galba's response. "I choose my soldiers. I don't buy them." Buddy, this is the 1st century. Everything is for sale. The first sign that things were going south was at the Milvian Bridge. Nero had promised a group of Marines they'd be promoted to full-blown legionaries. When they showed up to ask Galba to honor the deal, he didn't give them a promotion. He gave them a cavalry charge. Thousands of unarmed men slaughtered because the emperor didn't like their tone. As a centurion, that's when the light bulb went off. If the God King treats a promotion request like a mutiny, how long until my pension becomes optional? I earn 3,750 denarii, a year 16 times what my men make. I've got a lot to lose. If I'm a primus pilus, pulling 15,000, that's buy a villa, and ignore the neighbor's money. Galba wasn't just stingy. He was a walking HR nightmare. The man allegedly wept at the sight of a lavish banquet because of the cost. He once rewarded a world-class flute player with 5 denarii. 5. That's not a tip. That's an insult you give to a bad waiter. So, when the Rhine legions refused to renew their oath in January, we didn't see it as treason. We saw it as a market correction. Enter Marcus Salvius Otho. If Galba was a crusty old boot, Otho was a silk slipper. He spent more time in front of a mirror than a high-end courtesan, but he knew one thing Galba didn't: how to write a check. He didn't need the whole army. He just needed 23 Praetorian guards to hail him as emperor. The rest of us? We just watched except for one guy. Sempronius Densus, a centurion assigned to guard Galba's heir, Piso. When the assassins rushed in, everyone else ran. Densus stood there with nothing but his vine staff, the stick we used to hit recruits, and started screaming at the assassins for being traitors. When they didn't stop, he pulled his dagger and fought a whole mob alone until they hacked his legs out from under him. He died for a man who hadn't given him a dime. In a year defined by survivalist pragmatism, Densus was a rhetorical construct of virtue, the only man in Rome who forgot that loyalty was a luxury we could no longer afford. But while Otho was busy raiding the imperial wardrobe, the Rhine legions were already marching. They had their own candidate, Aulus Vitellius, a man whose primary qualification for leadership was that he could eat more than a small village and was one of the boys. We were no longer an army. We were a series of competing fan clubs with heavy weaponry. And the Po Valley was about to become the stage for a fratricidal nightmare where Roman killed Roman, not for glory, but because the guy in the other helmet had a different employer. The Centurion's dilemma was simple. Do you die like Densus for a lost cause? Or do you wait to see whose gold stinks the least? By April, the God King title was a revolving door. Otho and Vitellius's legions met at Bedra for a Roman-on-Roman bloodbath. Imagine stabbing a guy you shared a tent with in Britain because your bosses couldn't agree on a budget. Otho killed himself to save Rome, but we knew the truth. He just lost the bet. Then came Vitellius. The man was a walking stomach. His shield of Minerva dish peacock brains and flamingo tongues cost more than a legion's yearly grain supply. While he was busy vomiting to make room for dessert, the East woke up. Enter Vespasian, a guy who actually knew how a sword worked, and, more importantly, how a tax ledger worked. Vespasian didn't care about divine dignity. When his son complained about a tax on public urinals, Vespasian held a gold coin to his nose and muttered, "Pecunia non olet." Money doesn't stink. The year ended with a second battle at Bedriacum, a night of pure chaos where fathers killed sons in the dark. By the time Vespasian sat on the throne, the Centurion was broken. We learned the X factor of 69 AD. Loyalty is a transaction, and the man with the gold makes the gods. As Vespasian died, he joked, "Dear me, I think I'm becoming a god." Honestly, after the year we had, a god with a sense of humor was the only thing left to believe in.